In today's video, we'll dive into some insights and statements shared by David Grusch, a seasoned expert from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and National Reconnaissance Office, alongside revelations from former Army Colonel Karl Nell. We're focusing on some key highlights from the SOL Foundation's inaugural UAP symposium, which unfolded over the 17th and 18th of November. Join us as we explore these significant discussions and their implications. But before we dive into the celestial disclosure pool, I want to read the SOL Foundation's website description of what this inaugural symposium comprised of. And I quote, "After decades of undeserved marginality, unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, are enjoying unprecedented levels of public interest and newfound legitimacy in academia, government, media, and even venture capital. Yet this sudden turnaround is deepening rather than lessening the enigma of the phenomena, revealing not only all the questions about them that have gone unanswered, but the many more that must now be asked. Are some of these unidentified aerospace and undersea objects technological and non-anthropogenic?" Non-anthropogenic means not originating from humans or human activity. Now let's continue. How can the natural sciences comprehensively study UAP, and how are the humanities and social sciences uniquely poised to understand the phenomena? Perhaps most importantly, how should the United States, European, and other governments respond to the likely reality of non-anthropogenic UAP, as well as the prospect currently acknowledged in congressional legislation that long-standing UAP intelligence and research programs have been concealed under extreme classification? Finally, how might the commercialization of open UAP research contribute to government disclosure and social acceptance of UAP and possible non-human intelligences? This Stanford School of Medicine sponsored symposium will address these and other pressing questions by bringing together leading voices on UAP from academia, government, and industry. Much more than an academic conference, this first of its kind meeting will see its participants propose government policies, programs of research and funding, and investment strategies by which institutional, economic, and cultural resources adequate to the magnitude of the phenomena can be marshaled and organized. SOL also intends with this event to elevate public discourse on UAP, demonstrating that intellectual sobriety and mature professionalism can yield new insights into these anomalies par excellence. The first individual we're going to discuss is Karl Nell, former Army Colonel. I don't know if it has been explicitly conveyed how he garnered his understanding about the UFO cover-up. But based on some citations that I'm going to share with you, I think there's a very good shot that he worked in a legacy UFO program and/or he has actually seen the craft, non-human craft, up firsthand and personal, touching the hardware. Before I show you the citations that make a case for that, I just want to quote from the original article that broke this whole David Grusch story from June 5th from the debrief, and I quote, his assertion, and this is from Karl Nell, his assertion concerning the existence of a terrestrial arms race occurring sub rosa over the past 80 years, focused on reverse engineering technologies of unknown origin, is fundamentally correct, as is the indisputable realization that at least some of these technologies of unknown origin derive from non-human intelligence, said Karl Nell, the retired Army colonel who worked with Grusch on the UAP task force. So the following clip is from the July 26 UFO hearing, which was under oath. Pay very close attention to what David Grusch states regarding the 40 witnesses he spoke to, because as we continue with this, it will become clear that it appears that former Colonel Karl Nell is amongst those 40 witnesses that David Grusch is citing in the following clip.
Mr. Grusch, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
So a big takeaway from that clip is that David Grusch said, I had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Now, technically, he said over 40 witnesses, but I still believe amongst those, one of those people is former Army Colonel Karl Nell. And not only that, I'm very confident that Karl Nell was part of a legacy UFO program. And you'll see why I perceive that as we continue building this case. But in the following clip, Elizabeth Vargas interviews Leslie Kean. Leslie Kean was one of the authors of that June 5th debrief article that broke the David Grusch story. Leslie Kean literally cites Karl Nell as being amongst the 40 people that David Grusch spoke to.
David Grusch said in his testimony that he talked to 40 people over 4 years, all of whom had information on a secret military program that has non-human craft and remains. Is it surprising to you that none of those 40 people has spoken out?
It is surprising. It actually isn't, Elizabeth. I mean, some of them have. One of them actually was in our article in the debrief. I mean, a former Army colonel named Karl Nell. I think maybe some of them have spoken out a little bit, and we just don't maybe put it all together. But it really isn't surprising because of the repercussions that people face. And Dave Grusch is an example of that. He talked a little bit in the hearing yesterday about the repercussions that he's faced, which are very harmful to him, both personally and professional.
So right from Leslie Kean's mouth, Karl Nell was one of the people he spoke to. And therefore, because of the other stuff that David Grusch stated, he testified under oath to the Inspector General. So Karl Nell is not just a high-level ex-government official that was quoted for the debrief article where he said that much of what Grusch is saying is true and that he vouches for Grusch's credibility, but it extends far beyond that. Karl Nell is also a whistleblower that testified to the Inspector General. Now, in the following clip is from an interview that took place on August 3rd for the BBC 4. And in this clip, very interestingly, Grusch says something that makes it clear to me, or likely to me, that these 40 people were all part of a legacy UFO program. Therefore, Karl Nell, assuming that he is part of this 40 people, and it does appear that way, he was part of a legacy UFO program. Now, I want to set you up for this clip a little bit. The host is going to say, how do you know they have these items? The host is referencing intact and partially intact alien vehicles in its possession. I don't want to play too much of it, but that's what he's referencing based upon the context.
But how do you know they have these items? Because you've not seen them yourself, have you?
There's certain things that I have firsthand access to that I can't publicly discuss at this time. However, myself and other colleagues interviewed, 40 individuals, both our current and former highly distinguished intelligence and military personnel that were specifically on these programs. And those that were willing, I directed to the Intelligence Community Inspector General. So the Inspector General was able to interview these people that do have direct firsthand information.
So I'm going to reiterate part of what Grusch stated, because I really want to drive home that if it's accurate what Leslie Kean said, that he is one of the 40 people that Grusch spoke to, then it's clear that Karl Nell was part of a legacy UFO program. And I will admit that Leslie Kean might be mistaken here, and this hinges on her being correct. However, she did author the article that broke the story along with Ralph Blumenthal in the debrief. So I'm not sure why she would be mistaken. I'm not saying it's even near impossible. I'm just saying that it's likely that she probably understands this part of the equation, if you will. So in that interview, the host says, how do you know they have these items? The host is referencing intact and partially intact alien vehicles. Grusch goes on to say, myself and other colleagues interviewed 40 individuals. Both are current and former highly distinguished intelligence and military personnel. Now, Karl Nell is definitely a highly distinguished military personnel. He was a colonel in the Army. Then Grusch goes on to say, these highly distinguished intelligence and military personnel that were specifically on these programs, and those that were willing, I directed to the intelligence community inspector general, so the inspector general was able to interview these people that do have direct firsthand information. Direct firsthand information. If Karl Nell is amongst those 40 people, then I would surmise, is a whistleblower that has more intimate interaction with the cover-up than even David Grusch does, because he was part of a legacy UFO program presumably hidden from Congress. There's a rumor circulating that Karl Nell is actually going to become the head of AARO. We already know for a fact that Sean Kirkpatrick's on his way out. I believe it's December that he's going to leave and someone's going to replace him. Well, there's a rumor that it's going to be Karl Nell. Now, wouldn't that be amazing? Because apparently Karl Nell is a first-hand witness, worked in a legacy UFO program, may have even gotten up close and personal to alien craft, right? So imagine someone who worked for a UFO legacy program, seen the craft up close and personal, knows how real this is, cannot deny it, promotes UFO transparency, promotes UFO disclosure, wants the American people to be told the truth about this enigma, and he becomes the head of the Pentagon's UFO program, AARO. That would be astounding, you know what I'm saying? No doubt about it. But then again, it's only a rumor. However, the Juan from Twitter actually attended the SOL symposium. And he wrote, because it wrapped up today, and he wrote, and I quote, one more tidbit before I head to the airport. I spoke to Karl Nell briefly at the conclusion of today's SOL conference. Of course, as I shook his hand and thanked him for his service to our country, I also told him, I'm pretty sure I'm shaking the hand of the new head of AARO. His response, don't believe all the news that's out there. Just my read on his reaction, and after speaking with Ross Coulthart, who was also in attendance, I think we know who is replacing Kirkpatrick. And then I follow up because I just, want to make sure where he's coming from. I say to the Juan, so your read is that Karl Nell will become the head of AARO. And the Juan responds, yeah, I think so. Here's some notes that the Juan took during Karl Nell's presentation, and I quote, some very interesting statements, phrases strewn throughout Karl Nell's slides presented today at SOL. Hierarchy of beings, prime directive. Schumer UAP legislation is an example of Pasulka's emergent phenomenon. We want to be engineering isotopes instead of raw materials. Disclosure is a process, not an event. Disclosure is a government-first problem. I will not comment on AARO or on Kirkpatrick. Controlled disclosure in order to prevent catastrophic disclosure. TUO equals technology of unknown origin. TNO equals temporary non-attributed object. Use the Kelvin UFO photo in a slide when discussing UAPs. used the Chinese spy balloon photo when discussing TNOs. More notes from the Yuan regarding Karl Nell's presentation, and I quote, "Later on, I'll post some notes on the Karl Nell extremely detailed discussion on the origins of the Schumer UAP legislation and what comes next. However, one of the highlights from it was Jacques Vallée acting like an audience member and asking Nell some questions after Nell's talk. And Vallée spoke out with visible emotion. Vallée, paraphrasing. Superficially, there is nothing better for disclosure than the proposed Schumer UAP legislation. However, scientists and researchers of the phenomenon, like everyone in the room is, will reject it as an inappropriate definition of the phenomenon itself. You don't want to lock yourself into the definitions that it stipulates." Vallée then said that he had special concerns with the following: confiscation and the notion of eminent domain, i.e. the government taking possession of alleged metamaterials not already in the hands of the U.S. government. Religious artifacts, not addressed in Schumer legislation. Abductions, not addressed in Schumer legislation. Referenced Whitley Strieber, who was sitting nearby. Nell's response to Vallée: definitions are evolving with time and with a specific purpose. We are zeroing in on a singular aspect of the phenomenon for now so that the U.S. government can get a handle on it. Eminent domain is too complex, but we can talk offline. So that was actually really interesting. Vallée is concerned about eminent domain, the government taking materials, crash retrieval materials, even religious artifacts that may have ultimately originated from non-human intelligence from citizens. Because in the Schumer administration, I think it talks about eminent domain, where it's been proposed that they want to take back any craft that have been recovered and are now in the hands of aerospace corporations. And he doesn't want that to filter into, or he doesn't want that to expand to private citizens. I think that's what he was getting at. And then I'm not going to go into any more of it. You can go back and examine it yourself if you want, but that was very interesting nevertheless. So there's a post that dropped on Reddit made by James J. And I'm going to read a little bit of what he posted. He obviously attended the SOL Symposium, and his post provides further clarity on what went down. And I quote, "Karl Nell presented a dense DoD-style set of slides explaining the thought process behind the design of the Schumer Amendment, including the political reality and purpose of the legislation and the definitions and use of the terms NHI, etc. in the bill. He said that the supporters of the legislation include people from both parties from the Gang of Eight, and to pay attention to the fact that they are read into everything and still supporting the legislation. He outlined several key differences in the legislation versus the JFK legislation it is modeled after. They learned some things, and there are differences, namely the existence of physical materials. The amendment is just the first part of the larger plan to disclose. They hope the bill will be approved in 2024, and the panel will function until 2030. He says to watch if it passes, then if it does, watch for the public disclosures of the decisions of the panel." In the questions after Jacques Vallée criticized by the legislation due to the eminent domain clauses, asking Karl if they will come to take the physical samples he has collected and the ones in the labs here at Stanford and other universities. Quote, "This is not how science is done," he said. He also said that after Condon, a bunch of evidence disappeared. How can they trust that the government will do proper science with it? Now, I wasn't present at this symposium, so I can't say for certainty, but this individual said, and I'm going to quote, this is one of the more interesting parts of that passage. He said, that's Karl Nell, that the supporters of the legislation include people from both parties from the Gang of Eight, and to pay attention to the fact that they are read into everything and still support the legislation. So the Gang of Eight are like the most powerful people in the Congress that theoretically are supposed to be given access to anything they want that's going on within the government. So if I'm reading this correctly, they have been read into all or many of the legacy UFO programs and know all about the UFO crash retrieval programs on an official level. And even after having been read into all of that, they still support the legislation. So They don't think that there are any national security concerns that trump this legislation going forward. That's my read on that passage, but who knows? Now, in this tweet, the wand goes into David Grusch's presentation, who also presented at the SOL Foundation's conference. And I quote, "SOL concluded a bit ago with a short but very poignant presentation by David Grusch, who joined via Zoom. His key comments verbatim. Imagine a future where we no longer need to speculate about our place in the cosmos. The release of info on non-human intelligence has the potential to unite humanity, regardless of the ontological shock that would ensue. Disclosure will involve the releasing of info in a controlled and planned manner. This is a new era of spiritual awakening. We are in a paradigm shift with the power in our hands to transform our world. We are working towards a more enlightened and interconnected world." And for greater clarity, I will take the liberty to read the Reddit user's depiction of the presentation or speech by David Grusch. And I quote, "David Grusch was the surprise guest speaker from Zoom. He made a nice statement about his hopes for this to result in a better future of international cooperation. Then people asked him questions. He said reverse engineered tech has been integrated into conventional programs. He said that the phenomenon probably does not have a singular source. He sees the Schumer Amendment and nonprofits like the SOL Foundation, ASA, the New Paradigm, etc., are a parallel track to reaching the truth, and encourage the field to not put their eggs in one basket. He'd like to support the disclosure panel as a staffer in the future. He said he never really wanted to be a public figure, but he takes the responsibility seriously." So I like what he says about not putting it all into one basket. This counteracts the boring narrative that some people have that the U.S. government is going to create this terrible threat narrative, and that's going to engulf us all, and we're all going to buy into it. Well, no, just as Grusch said, there's not a singular track. Don't put all your eggs into one basket. It's not just going to be the government that helps us get to the bottom of this. It's also going to be private organizations that are going to help us get to the bottom of this. It's not just going to be, by the way, the United States. It's going to be a collective effort of every country on this world. People are so obsessed with their little narratives that, in my opinion, often don't make very much sense. But the other thing I wanted to say is that eventually the SOL Foundation will put these presentations on YouTube, so we won't have to rely on people's notes. But it's kind of cool to get this out now and to get you abreast of, is that the correct word? To get you abreast of what is taking place the best I can. And then when it comes out on YouTube, you'll have a perfect copy of it. There's not much else to say than that the SOL Foundation's first UFO symposium is utterly historical, and from my perspective is yet another escalation in this process that increased its speed on December 16th, 2017. And I guess technically this process began whenever the US government or any other government recognized we are not alone, through whatever means that occurred, crash retrieval or otherwise. But the process, in my opinion, is coming to an end. And the realization that we're not alone and that we're being engaged by non-human civilizations is upon us. And I suppose it will be the most interesting era of human history since the beginning of time. And with that, I ask that you don't forget to subscribe, because as this continues, you're probably not going to want to miss my updates. And if you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You could become a YouTube member. You could become a patron. You could give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below, or you can just slap a like on this bad boy and I will appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.